They say that miracles don't always happen in churches. Sometimes, they unfold between strangers at 30,000 feet, where the sky itself becomes a silent witness to grace. Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. On Flight 345 bound for New York, one such miracle began, not with light, not with music, but with an act of cruelty. There were 180 people on that plane. Some would remember the screams. Others, the silence that followed. But all would later agree on one thing: something holy had passed among them, something that no turbulence or rational explanation could shake. This story begins, however, far from the clouds, in a quiet Georgia home filled with grief. Jennifer Walsh stood at the doorway of a nearly empty living room, the last boxes taped and labeled. The air smelled of dust and farewell. Only the soft ticking of a wall clock dared to break the silence. Her daughter Emma, 8 years old, sat cross-legged on the carpet, clutching a small wooden rosary in her hands. It was the same rosary that had once belonged to Jennifer's late husband, David. A man of quiet faith, he had carried it during long hospital nights when pain became prayer and fear gave way to surrender. He had passed away just 6 months earlier, leaving behind a void that no amount of sunlight or time could fill. Emma had asked once why her father never let go of the rosary, even when he slept. Jennifer remembered answering, "Because when you hold on to Mary, sweetheart, she holds on to you." Now, as they prepared to move to New York to live with Jennifer's mother, Dorothy, that same rosary had become Emma's treasure, the one piece of her father she could still touch. When Dorothy arrived to help them pack the last suitcase, she found Emma sitting by the window, threading the rosary beads through her fingers like a child counting stars. The morning light caught the tiny silver crucifix, and Dorothy smiled. "That rosary's been through more than all of us," she said gently. "It crossed oceans with your great-grandmother from Ireland. She used to say the Virgin Mary watched over sailors and travelers, star of the sea, she called her. Maybe she'll watch over you in the skies too." Emma looked up, eyes wide. "So it's magic?" Dorothy chuckled softly. "No, love. It's better than magic, it's grace." Jennifer stood quietly behind them, the weight of her mother's words sinking deep. For weeks she had struggled to keep faith alive, for herself, for Emma. She still went to church, still prayed mechanically before bed, but her heart felt like a locked room. Her husband's death had left behind not only emptiness but confusion. If God is love, why so much pain? Still, she packed the rosary into Emma's small pink backpack that morning, as if it were a shield. Some habits of faith survived even when belief trembled. At the airport, the hum of engines and voices swallowed their thoughts. It was the sort of place where everyone seemed to be running, from delays, from goodbyes, from their own private storms. Jennifer's eyes were tired but kind. Emma held her hand tightly, glancing up at the enormous windows where airplanes rolled into blinding sunlight. "Will Daddy see us from heaven?" she asked. Jennifer swallowed. "Yes, sweetheart. Maybe he's even watching our flight." Emma nodded, satisfied. She slipped her fingers through the rosary in her pocket and whispered, "Then Mary will sit next to us too." Jennifer smiled faintly, brushing her daughter's hair. "I hope she does." Across the terminal, another woman waited, impatient, immaculate, and already furious. Karen Mitchell checked her watch for the 5th time, glaring at the gate agent as if punctuality itself were a divine right. Every movement around her seemed too slow, every sound too loud. The flight had been delayed by 20 minutes due to a missing catering cart, and for Karen, a corporate executive used to controlling every detail, this was intolerable. She muttered under her breath, "Unbelievable. People have jobs to do." The man next to her glanced nervously, pretending to scroll his phone. Karen was used to that reaction. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who mistook fear for respect. Once, years ago, she had worn a cross around her neck, her mother's gift at confirmation. It had broken during college, and she had never replaced it. "I don't need symbols to be strong," she had said then. Since that day, faith had become a relic, something she had long buried under deadlines, ambition, and pride. Now, she rolled her eyes at the announcement overhead. Final boarding call for Flight 345 to New York. Finally, she muttered, grabbing her bag. Jennifer and Emma found their seats halfway down the plane, an aisle and window. Emma pressed her face to the glass, fascinated by the wingtips glinting in sunlight. Jennifer exhaled, already weary, and glanced at the rosary looped around Emma's wrist. She smiled faintly. "Keep it close, sweetheart. It's a long flight." Minutes later, Karen boarded, dragging her designer handbag, scanning rows with barely concealed irritation. She had been upgraded to first class but found the aisle blocked by a mother helping her daughter settle in. "Excuse me," Karen said sharply. Jennifer quickly stood to make room. "Of course, sorry, she's just..." But Karen's gaze had already fallen on Emma's lap, where the wooden rosary glowed in the light. She frowned, a trace of annoyance crossing her face. "Do you really have to play with that here?" Jennifer blinked, startled. "It's not a toy. It's her rosary." Karen scoffed softly, muttering, "Superstition." Emma didn't speak. She only held the beads tighter. As Karen squeezed past, her handbag brushed the child's hand. The rosary slipped, dangling briefly from Emma's wrist before falling to the floor. Karen sighed audibly. "Oh, for heaven's sake, watch your things," she snapped, reaching down. But instead of handing it back, she lifted it carelessly, tugging at the fragile thread. "Please," Emma said softly, "that's mine." The snap was almost imperceptible. A quiet click, followed by the scattering of beads across the narrow aisle. Jennifer froze. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Emma's small voice broke the silence. "You broke it." Karen looked down, unmoved. It was falling apart anyway. She stepped over the beads and walked briskly toward first class. The flight attendant stared after her, mouth slightly open. Jennifer knelt quickly, gathering the tiny brown beads with trembling fingers. "Mom," Emma whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. Why did she do that? Jennifer's throat tightened. She didn't have an answer. She only gathered the last few beads and pressed them into her daughter's hand. "Don't worry, sweetheart. God can fix anything that's broken." Neither of them could know then that those words would soon prove true, in a way neither heaven nor earth would ever forget. For the next half hour, the cabin hummed with the ordinary noises of flight, seat belts clicking, engines humming, the faint rustle of magazines. But for Jennifer and Emma, everything felt different. The calm had been broken. Jennifer's hands shook slightly as she tried to help Emma piece together the scattered rosary beads, but the thin cord was frayed and useless. A few of the beads rolled under the seats and disappeared forever. Emma gathered what she could in her palm, her eyes wide and tearful. "Mom, we can fix it when we get home, right?" Jennifer nodded quickly. "Of course, sweetheart. Grandma will help us. Don't cry." But inside, her heart was burning, with hurt, and anger, and something darker. There was a cruelty in what had just happened, a kind of quiet violence that made no sense. How could someone simply destroy what was sacred to a child, and walk away as if it were nothing? She looked down the aisle toward first class, where the curtain now hung closed. Behind it sat the woman who had broken her daughter's rosary, the one whose coldness had turned a child's prayer into ashes. Jennifer forced herself to breathe. She knew that anger, left unchecked, could poison the soul. Still, as she turned to comfort Emma, she whispered silently to heaven, "Mary, protect her from this pain. She doesn't understand cruelty yet." Emma, still clutching the broken crucifix, whispered back a prayer she remembered from her grandmother. "Hail Mary, full of grace," her small voice trembled, but it did not falter. The words rose softly above the noise of the engines, carried like a fragile light through the heavy air. In first class, Karen Mitchell sat reclined, scrolling through emails on her phone. Her jaw was tight, her mind restless. The confrontation from a few minutes ago barely registered, just another inconvenience in a day already overflowing with them. She had spent her whole life outrunning discomfort. Faith, relationships, empathy, they were all inefficiencies in her eyes. Success had become her only altar. Her assistant's latest message flashed on the screen: reminder, meeting with investors, 3 p.m. She typed a curt reply, barely noticing the faint smear of rosary dust on her manicured hand. A single bead, dark brown, small, worn smooth by decades of prayer, had stuck to her sleeve. She flicked it away. Outside the window, clouds stretched like an endless white ocean. Somewhere beneath them, whole cities lived and prayed. But in the sealed silence of first class, Karen might as well have been alone in the universe. Her reflection in the glass looked cold and unfamiliar. She tried not to see it. Meanwhile, in the back of the plane, something quiet but powerful was unfolding. A flight attendant named Maria, a young woman from Colombia with a small silver crucifix under her uniform, had witnessed the entire scene. She had wanted to intervene but froze, unsure of how to respond. Now, watching Jennifer and her daughter quietly praying over the broken rosary, something stirred inside her heart. She approached softly, kneeling by their row. "Is everything all right here?" Jennifer forced a smile. "We're fine, thank you." Maria hesitated. "I saw what happened. I'm so sorry. People can be unkind." "It's okay," Jennifer whispered, though her eyes said otherwise. Maria reached into her pocket and removed a small chain rosary, blue and silver. "I keep this with me when I fly. Maybe you'd like to borrow it until yours is fixed." Emma's face lit up, though her tears still shimmered. "It's beautiful," she said, tracing the beads with gentle fingers. Maria smiled, her accent soft and warm. "It's from Fatima. My mother gave it to me for protection. And today, I think you need it more than I do." Jennifer's throat tightened. "Thank you," she whispered. As Maria returned to her post, she paused by the galley and glanced toward the curtain separating first class. A strange heaviness lingered there, like air before a storm. She couldn't explain it, but she felt it deep in her bones. Back in her seat, Karen leaned her head against the window, closing her eyes. She told herself she was just tired, tired of delays, tired of people, tired of having to pretend to care. But fatigue wasn't what she felt. It was restlessness. For the first time in years, her thoughts drifted to her mother, the last person who had tried to bring her back to church. It had been 15 years since their last conversation. Karen had walked out of her mother's house after an argument about faith, leaving behind a crucifix on the kitchen table. "I don't need your religion," she'd shouted, slamming the door. Now, at 30,000 feet, the echo of that door still haunted her. She shifted uneasily, but the memory clung like static. The seat felt too small, the air too thin. The rosary beads she had broken replayed in her mind, the child's pleading eyes, the sound of the thread snapping. Why couldn't she stop thinking about it? Karen pressed the call button. "Water," she said flatly when the attendant arrived. Her voice was cold, but beneath it trembled something unsteady. She didn't notice that, for the first time in years, her hands were shaking. Far behind her, Jennifer held Emma close as the plane leveled out above the clouds. The seatbelt sign blinked off, and people began settling into routine, reading, sleeping, pretending the world below did not exist. But for Jennifer, the world had shifted. She glanced at the broken beads resting in her daughter's lap, their round surfaces reflecting faint cabin light. They reminded her of something Father Brennan had once said at her husband's funeral: "Sometimes faith breaks so that grace can enter through the cracks." She had not understood it then. But as she looked at Emma now, so small, so brave, she wondered if that truth was taking shape before her eyes. Emma turned suddenly, staring toward the front of the plane. "What is it, honey?" "I don't know," Emma said. "But I think that lady's sad." Jennifer frowned. "Who?" "The one who broke my rosary." Jennifer's eyes softened. "You can tell that from here." Emma nodded. "I can feel it. She's sad inside." Jennifer's breath caught. The innocence of her daughter's words pierced her anger. Maybe children see what adults forget, how even the cruelest hearts bleed silently behind their walls. She took her daughter's hand and whispered, "Then let's pray for her, okay?" Emma smiled faintly. Okay. And as their quiet prayer rose in the dim cabin, something unseen stirred beyond the curtain in first class, a soft tremor in the air, like the first movement of grace preparing to break through stone. At 30,000 feet, time behaves differently. Minutes stretch, thoughts echo, and silence has a way of pressing against the soul. Somewhere over the Atlantic, between the thin blue of heaven and the world below, the boundary between the visible and the invisible began to blur. Karen Mitchell could not rest. The hum of the jet engine seemed louder, almost alive. Every few seconds, a cold wave of unease rolled through her chest, and she found herself gripping the armrest, not from turbulence but from something deeper, something she couldn't name. Her phone screen glowed dimly in the dark cabin, the unread emails stacking like small demands on her soul. Deadlines. Numbers. Meetings. She had built her entire life on control, yet for the first time in years, she felt powerless. She locked the screen and stared at her reflection in the window, two tired eyes, lifeless, suspended above an ocean of clouds. And then, she saw it. A faint movement in the reflection, someone walking down the aisle behind her. Karen turned slightly. No one was there. The first-class cabin was nearly empty, its lights dimmed, passengers half asleep. The air was still, except for the steady rhythm of the engines. But when she turned back toward the window, her reflection had changed. A woman now stood behind her reflection, where moments before there had been nothing. She was dressed simply, in a long blue garment that shimmered faintly in the cabin light. Her face was soft yet radiant, serene yet filled with the kind of strength that disarms pride. Karen froze, every part of her trembling. The woman stepped closer, not physically, but in presence, like light filling a shadow. No one else seemed to notice. The man 2 seats ahead snored softly. The flight attendant poured coffee. Yet for Karen, the world had fallen away. Her throat went dry. "Who are you?" she whispered, though her voice barely escaped her lips. The woman's gaze held hers. Her eyes seemed to carry oceans, grief and mercy intertwined. And when she spoke, the words were not heard with ears, but with the heart itself. "I am the one your mother spoke of," she said gently. "The one you once loved when you were a child." Karen shook her head, eyes wide. "No. I don't." "You do," the voice interrupted softly. "You loved me once. You spoke to me before sleep. You asked me to help you be kind." Tears filled Karen's eyes. She remembered. She had been 8, maybe 9. Kneeling beside her bed, hands clasped around a small silver rosary, whispering prayers her mother had taught her. "Hail Mary, full of grace." But that was another lifetime. Before ambition. Before anger. Before she learned that hardness kept people away, and pain too. Her voice cracked. "Why are you here?" The woman's face seemed to shimmer with sadness. "Because you broke what was sacred, and you forgot what was holy. Yet still, heaven remembers you." Karen covered her face with her hands. "I didn't mean to hurt her," she whispered. I was tired. I was angry. "And so was I once," said the voice, calm and knowing. "When my son was hurt. When cruelty struck the innocent. But I forgave, because mercy heals what anger cannot." The cabin lights flickered. Karen felt warmth spreading through her chest, chasing away the cold that had lived there for years. She lowered her hands slowly, afraid to look, but when she did, the woman was still there, closer now. Not frightening, but achingly familiar. "Do you know me now?" the woman asked. Karen nodded weakly. "You're her." The Virgin Mary smiled faintly. "Yes. But not only for saints, Karen. For the lost, too. Especially for the lost." Something inside Karen broke. Years of control shattered like glass. She began to sob silently, shoulders trembling, tears falling onto her lap. "I don't know how to come back." Mary's voice was a whisper that seemed to carry through the whole cabin, though no one stirred. "You already have." Then she reached out, not physically, but through presence. A warmth encircled Karen like the embrace of sunlight through clouds. In that instant, every wound she had buried, every regret, every sin, every harsh word, rose before her like a storm, and was met not with condemnation, but with mercy. She saw her mother's kitchen table, the day she left. The crucifix she had abandoned. The years of silence she had justified. And then she saw Emma, the child whose rosary she had broken. The image burned in her mind. Her small hands, her tearful eyes. "Ask her forgiveness," Mary said gently. "And teach your hands to hold again, not to harm." Karen pressed her palms together, trembling. "Please, forgive me." Mary's face softened, luminous and calm. "It is not I you must ask, but she will forgive you, because innocence knows mercy better than pride ever can." The engines hummed again. The warmth began to fade, the light dimming softly like the end of dawn. "Wait," Karen pleaded. "Don't go." Mary's voice lingered, echoing faintly, "I am never gone. I am with those who break, and those who mend." And then the light vanished. The cabin returned to its ordinary dimness. Karen sat frozen, tears drying on her face. Around her, no one had noticed. The woman beside her was asleep, her coffee untouched. The world continued as before. But Karen knew nothing would ever be the same. She looked down at her lap, and gasped. There, resting in her hands, lay a single wooden bead. It was worn smooth, its color familiar. It was Emma's. Her fingers closed around it, and for the first time in 15 years, she whispered words she thought she had forgotten. "Hail Mary, full of grace." The plane continued its steady course through the clouds, but something unseen had shifted forever. When Flight 345 began its slow descent, the cabin stirred with the familiar choreography of arrival. Seatbacks straightened, trays clicked shut, passengers stretched stiff legs and powered on phones, eager to return to their ordinary worlds. But for Karen Mitchell, nothing felt ordinary anymore. She sat perfectly still, hands folded, the single wooden bead clutched between her palms. The engine's low hum seemed to echo through her chest like a heartbeat. Every second that passed felt both unbearable and sacred. She had seen something no one would believe. Yet it was not disbelief that frightened her now, it was what came next. She whispered a prayer, hesitant, uncertain, but real. "Mother of God, help me do what I must." The intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final approach into New York. Please remain seated until the aircraft comes to a full stop." Through the small window, the city stretched below like a sea of lights. Karen stared down at it, the glittering veins of highways and streets, the endless noise of a world chasing its own importance. She had lived in that world for years, hard, brilliant, empty. And now, a child's rosary lay broken because of her hand. In the back of the plane, Jennifer gently brushed Emma's hair as the little girl leaned sleepily against her arm. The blue Fatima rosary from the kind attendant still hung around Emma's wrist, its beads glinting softly in the cabin light. Jennifer looked at the few broken beads she'd gathered into a tissue. She had meant to throw them away but couldn't. Somehow, they felt alive, holy even in their imperfection. Emma stirred, murmuring, "Mom, do you think she's still sad?" Jennifer blinked. "Who, honey?" "The lady who broke my rosary." Her daughter's voice carried no bitterness, only quiet compassion. Jennifer smiled faintly. "Maybe. But sometimes being sad is how God starts to heal a person." Emma yawned and nestled closer. "Then I hope she's healing." Jennifer kissed her forehead. "Me too." The landing gear lowered with a low mechanical rumble. The cabin tilted, lights flickering across the rows of passengers. Emma crossed herself instinctively. Jennifer did too. Outside, the clouds parted, and the city lights of New York emerged like an ocean of gold. The wheels touched down with a hard thud. A few gasps, then applause from the back rows. The plane rolled to a slow, steady crawl toward the terminal. Seatbelts snapped open, overhead compartments creaked, and the long wait to disembark began. Karen stayed seated, staring at her hands. The single bead rested against her skin like a pulse. She heard Mary's words again in her mind, ask her forgiveness. Teach your hands to hold again. Her heart pounded. She didn't know what to say, how to approach them. But she knew she had to try. When the seatbelt light turned off, she rose slowly, clutching her bag. The first-class passengers began filing out ahead of her, but she lingered. Her reflection in the window looked different. Softer. Human. In economy class, Jennifer helped Emma gather her things. The little girl was humming softly, the melody of a hymn she barely remembered. Then, from the corner of her eye, Jennifer saw movement. Someone approaching. It was her. Karen Mitchell stopped a few feet away, her posture uncertain, her face pale and wet with tears. The same woman who had snapped a child's rosary now looked like she'd walked out of a storm, fragile, undone, stripped of armor. Passengers brushed past, indifferent, but time seemed to slow for the three of them. Karen tried to speak, but her throat tightened. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I'm sorry." Jennifer blinked, stunned. "Excuse me?" Karen took a trembling breath. "What I did back there. I can't explain it. I was angry. At everything. But mostly at myself. And I hurt your little girl." Her voice cracked. "I'm so sorry." Emma looked up, her small eyes filled with something that wasn't fear or anger, but recognition. "It's okay," she said softly. "Mary already forgave you." Karen's lips trembled. "Mary?" Emma nodded. "She forgives people when they're sorry. My grandma told me." A sob escaped Karen before she could stop it. She knelt down in the aisle, level with the child. "You have no idea what you've just done for me," she whispered. Jennifer watched in silence, her own anger melting into something gentler, something she didn't expect. She looked into Karen's eyes and saw not arrogance, but emptiness finally ready to be filled. After a long moment, Jennifer said quietly, "We forgive you." Karen lowered her head, tears spilling freely. "Thank you," she said, the words breaking like glass in her throat. Emma reached into her backpack and opened her small hand. "You can keep this one," she said, placing one of the broken beads into Karen's palm. Karen stared at it as if it were a living thing. "Are you sure?" Emma smiled. "It's okay. It'll remind you that God can fix anything." Karen closed her fingers around the bead and whispered, "I believe you." As passengers began to shuffle out, the three of them stood quietly in the aisle, the noise of the world resuming around them. Flight attendants moved past, luggage rolled, and voices rose in impatience, but for a moment, Grace lingered in that narrow space like the scent of rain after drought. Karen finally stepped aside, letting them go ahead. She watched as Jennifer and Emma walked toward the exit, the little girl's hand resting in her mother's, the blue Fatima rosary glimmering faintly under the cabin lights. When they disappeared beyond the door, Karen pressed the bead to her chest and whispered, "Thank you." Outside, the rain had started. And as she stepped onto the wet runway, the city lights reflecting off puddles, Karen felt something she hadn't in years, peace. Not the fragile peace of success, but the kind that humbles and heals. She tilted her face toward the rain, eyes closed, and for a brief, luminous instant, she felt a presence again, soft, maternal, wordless. It said only this, "Welcome home." That night, in a quiet New York hotel room overlooking the city skyline, Karen Mitchell sat on the edge of her bed, the single wooden bead lying in her open palm. Outside, the hum of traffic was constant, a river of sound that once soothed her sense of control. But tonight, it felt far away, meaningless, compared to the silence within her. She hadn't slept since the flight. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the woman in blue, the gentle gaze, the voice that pierced through pride, the mercy that felt like light breaking through stone. She turned the bead slowly between her fingers, tracing its smooth surface. How strange, she thought, that something so small could weigh more than the world. For the first time in years, she knelt beside her bed. It felt awkward at first, her knees stiff, her hands trembling, but as soon as she tried to pray, the words came unbidden, the same words she had whispered as a child beside her mother's chair. "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee." Her voice cracked halfway through, but she didn't stop. Tears fell freely as she continued the prayer she had abandoned so long ago. Each word seemed to mend something invisible inside her. When she finished, she picked up her phone. Her mother's number was still in her contacts, unchanged after all these years. Her thumb hovered over the call button, her heart pounding. And then she pressed it. A pause. One ring. Two. Then a soft voice, hesitant, aged but unmistakably loving. "Hello." Karen's breath caught. "Mom." A gasp on the other end. "Karen? Is that you?" Tears blurred her vision. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." There was a long silence. Then the sound of quiet sobbing. "Oh, sweetheart," her mother said. "I've been praying for this call for 15 years. Karen pressed the bead against her chest, the memory of the Virgin's voice echoing through her mind, "For the lost too. Especially for the lost." That night, mother and daughter spoke until dawn, their words weaving over old wounds like stitches of grace. It was as though heaven itself had orchestrated their reunion, one phone call, one bead, one miracle at 30,000 feet. Meanwhile, across the city, in a small apartment filled with unpacked boxes, Jennifer Walsh sat with her mother, Dorothy, and Emma. The night was quiet, the air filled with the comforting scent of chamomile tea. Dorothy examined the broken rosary spread out on the table. Her fingers moved slowly, threading a new cord through the scattered beads. Each click of wood against string sounded like a heartbeat. "You know," she said softly, "when a rosary breaks, it's not the end of prayer. It's just an invitation to begin again." Jennifer smiled faintly. "That sounds like something you'd say." Dorothy chuckled. "It's something your great-grandmother used to say when the fishermen lost their nets. If it breaks, mend it. God gives us hands for a reason." Emma sat beside her grandmother, helping to sort the beads. "Can we make it stronger this time?" she asked. Dorothy nodded. "Oh yes. Stronger than before." As they worked, Jennifer glanced at the small space where one bead was missing, the one Emma had given to the woman on the plane. For a moment, she thought of that woman's face, pale, trembling, overwhelmed by repentance, and she whispered a quiet prayer for her. May Mary guide her home. When the rosary was finally complete, Dorothy held it up. The crucifix gleamed faintly in the lamplight. It was imperfect, yes, with one bead missing, but somehow, it looked more beautiful that way, like faith itself, scarred, fragile, and real. Dorothy placed it in Emma's hands. "There," she said. "Now it's yours again." Emma smiled and slipped the rosary around her wrist. "I think the missing bead is with someone who needs it." Jennifer's eyes softened. "You're probably right." They sat in silence for a moment, 3 generations linked by prayer, loss, and love. The room seemed to glow with a quiet warmth, as if heaven itself were leaning close, listening. At that very moment, in her hotel room across the city, Karen picked up her bead again. She no longer saw it as broken, but as a fragment of something whole, a reminder that even the shattered can belong to grace. She placed it on the nightstand, beside her mother's old crucifix that she had carried in her purse all these years without realizing why. The crucifix caught the faint light from the window, the silver reflecting the city's glow. Karen whispered one final prayer before sleep. "Mother of Mercy, thank you for finding me." And for the first time in years, she slept peacefully, without guilt, without fear, with the small certainty that forgiveness had truly found her. Weeks later, Jennifer received a small package in the mail. No return address, just a neatly written note inside. "To the little girl whose faith taught me how to believe again. Thank you for giving me the missing piece. KM." Inside, wrapped in soft tissue, was a single blue rosary bead, the same color as the one Emma still wore. Jennifer smiled, holding the bead in her hand. "She found her way," she murmured. Dorothy, watching from the kitchen, nodded. "Mary always finds her children, no matter how far they wander." Jennifer closed her eyes and whispered, then she must be very busy. Outside, the wind carried the faint chime of church bells, and in that moment, it was easy to believe that miracles, real, quiet miracles, still happen every day. Sometimes in churches. Sometimes in the sky. And sometimes in the fragile act of forgiving, and being forgiven.